Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz will join us later on in the program. On the show tonight,
today is the day to start saving lives.
Why the mayor of Highland Park says what she heard at a federal hearing on mass shootings was an out-of-body experience.
So don't go for the okie doke about it's about safety, because it's not.
Despite vocal opposition, City Council votes to reject an effort to roll back a speed camera law. We share those details.
It is inexcusable, unacceptable, un-American.
Guns, abortion, and the primetime January 6th hearing. Our Spotlight Politics team joins us to break it all down. Contention over summer music festivals in city neighborhoods and their impact on local residents. A team of University of Chicago scientists discover a stunning new fossil that was left in storage for years.
I don't want this show to be a black show. This is an American show.
And commemorating more than 400 years of Black American history in a new musical. But first, some of today's top stories. A measure to expand transit-oriented development to the city's south and west sides passed Chicago's City Council today. The Connected Communities Ordinance is designed to increase pedestrian safety while increasing affordable housing being built near train stations and along bus routes.
One of the areas in Inglewood from 69th and Ashland to 69th and Damon, which has about 20 vacant lots, if not a little bit more, of which 70% are city-owned vacant lots. This is why I'm supporting this HOPE ordinance with hopes and commitments that that stretch of land will be taken a look at so residents of Inglewood are not ignored, but yet helped by this ordinance.
Since 2013, the city has allowed large apartment complexes to be built alongside train stations. However, more than 90% of those developments have been built on the north and northwest sides, downtown, and around the West Loop. Another measure passed by City Council allows police to impound cars parked on city streets that have been used in drag races by using video evidence. This after videos have gone viral on social media of incidents like these. Crowds of people watching cars do donuts at downtown intersections.
This isn't about finding people and taking their cars from them. This is about safety. And so our hope is that with some aggressive enforcement on the front end, we can make some high-profile examples of the folks who are organizing this and doing this on a regular basis. And I can tell you that when someone has to pay $5,000 to get their car out of the pound, that should make an impression.
And before a car is towed, the owner would be warned with a letter outlining evidence that the car was used in the incident. The owner would be able to contest the impoundment. And we'll have more from City Hall later on in the program. Some older people and organizers are calling for movement from the mayor's office to name the interim commission for Chicago's new police oversight board. The Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability is designed to give residents control of the police department in an effort to end misconduct. However, the ordinance that created the commission called for the mayor to appoint members by January 1st.
Here we are today, and the Civilian Commission has still not yet been appointed. That means that here we are today, and the people of the city of Chicago still do not have a meaningful voice over the direction of policing that impacts their communities.
In May, the City Council Rules Committee recommended 14 Chicagoans to serve on the interim commission. The mayor then selects 7 from that list to serve. Up next, a federal hearing on guns highlights Highland Park and Chicago. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
A contingent of elected officials from Lake County were in Washington today as the horrific events of the July 4th parade mass shooting took center stage at a U.S. Senate hearing. The Highland Park tragedy has re-energized calls for a ban on guns like the kind the alleged shooter used, but critics say that's the wrong focus. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, since the massacre in Highland Park on the 4th of July, there have been 47 more mass shootings in the United States, meaning that so far this year, there have been 356 separate incidents in which 4 or more people were shot.
This is a crushing number when you consider its reflection on life in America. And it is disgraceful that we have done so little to stop it.
So in lieu of that, what can or should be done, Highland Park Mayor Nancy Rotering says residents of her hometown will take a long time to have answers to questions like how they can make children feel safe again, especially as kids are preparing to go back to school next month. But when it comes to what can be done to preventing future mass shootings, her answer is definitive.
Bottom line, we know that moving forward as a community, moving forward as a nation, we need to get combat weapons out of civilian hands. So I appreciate the question. Yes. It's still a new journey for all of us. It'll be a long journey, but right now we need these weapons out of civilian hands.
Well said. Well said.
That clapping coming from other local officials who were in the audience for that hearing in D.C., also from Democratic senators who want to ban semi-automatic rifles as well as large-capacity magazines. These are weapons that veteran, as well as Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth, says benefit troops on the battlefield, but shouldn't be for civilian use.
Every senator on this committee should study what happens to a body when struck by a round traveling at a speed of greater than 3,000 feet per second. As that emergency room doctor said, it liquefies your organs, liquefies them. You have no chance of survival. You should seek out emergency room doctors who can show you what happens when a round penetrates a human body at high velocity and tumbles around, exploding tissues and destroying those vital organs.
When an assault weapon is used in one of these shootings, there are more than 14 times more injuries and twice as many deaths than when any other type of weapon is used. And it's because these weapons were designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible.
But the head of the National African American Gun Association says for a long time, black codes made it illegal for Black Americans to have or to use guns, leaving them vulnerable and defenseless. And he says that a ban on so-called assault weapons would have the same effect. More African Americans are buying guns, and he says that Black Americans need access to AR-15s, which is what he uses to protect his home and his family.
If you implement a lot of these proposals that I'm hearing today, lots and lots of Black single women, lots of Black men who are trying to get protection in these tough neighborhoods, hood, whatever you want to call it, are not going to be able to do that. That's why they're discriminatory in their long-term effect on our community. So I'm opposed to anything along those lines.
Now, Congress did recently pass a gun control package. That was the first time in decades that it had taken such action. That was in the wake of the Uvalde mass shooting. Now, one of the architects of that package, Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas, has taken some heat from members of the GOP for that. But he says he believes that law will save lives, and he says it does so while protecting Second Amendment rights.
But one thing I am unwilling to do is to erode the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. One of the things I worry about is the focus on the firearm that we've heard so far deflects our attention from other places where I think we could make a substantial difference. Things like focusing on the criminals that committed 836 homicides last year in Chicago alone.
Cornyn and others also stressed that Congress needs to put more attention and focus on mental health. Now, you heard it there. Throughout the committee, there were various references made to crime in the city of Chicago, as well as to laws in Highland Park and in Illinois.
If the objective is stop mass murders, gun control doesn't work. State of Illinois has among the strictest gun control laws of any state in the country. Highland Park has even stricter gun control laws than the state of Illinois. Consistently, if you look across the country at the jurisdictions with the strictest gun control laws, almost without exception, they have the highest crime rates and the highest murder rates.
After the hearing, Highland Park Mayor Rodering says hearing comments like those from the senators from Texas was like having an out-of-body experience. Now, Highland Park did and still does locally ban assault-grade weapons, but Rodering says that her community is not an island. In order for it to be truly effective, there has to be a national law. Now, we are expecting some sort of gun control action from President Joe Biden tomorrow. With that, back to you, Brandis.
Of course, Amanda will be watching to see what happens there. And of course, we will see you again later in the program for Spotlight Politics. Thank you. An effort to roll back increased speed camera fines gets a red light. That was one of the outcomes from today's city council meeting. Alderpeople voted to reject a proposal that would do away with $35 speed camera tickets for drivers zipping past parks and schools. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more from today's showdown. Heather, remind us what this proposal called for.
Well, it would have only applied to drivers that are caught going between 6 and 9 miles over the limit near certain parks and schools in Chicago that are monitored by speed cameras. Now, it has always been the case that if you were caught going 10 miles an hour over the limit, you got a $35 ticket. And if you hit 11 miles an hour over the limit, you get a $100 ticket. After this vote today, that scenario will stay the same despite concerted criticism.
So the mayor and some others have cited that the increase in traffic crashes is one reason that the tickets should stay. Here she is today speaking on that.
When I first saw the data from last year showing that 174 people all over our city had been killed as a result of speed and distracted driving, and then layering on the small likelihood of survival at the speeds that are proposed by this ordinance. It was one of those gut punch moments for me. It's surreal to me, I have to say, that we're even having this discussion.
So the mayor there talking about the public safety aspect of this, Heather, but what's the financial incentive here?
Well, these tickets generate between $40 and $45 million a year for the city, and the city uses that money on a wide variety of things, including the police department and after-school programs. And the mayor was not willing to blow a nearly $80 million budget in both this year's budget and next year's budget, and had promised to veto this measure if it had passed, but it didn't come to that.
Okay, so Alderman Anthony Beal, he also spoke about this financial incentive. Here he is.
Because my people cannot keep affording to pay these fines and fees every single day. Just for going to the daycare, dropping your kid off, going to the grocery store, back and forth. You get a ticket going and coming. So don't go for the okie doke about it's about safety, because it's not.
The good old okie doke, Heather. Does he have a point, though? Do these tickets disproportionately impact Black and brown communities?
They do, and an analysis by ProPublica found that Black and Latino households in Chicago are more than twice as likely than white households to receive these tickets, and that is really what drew Alderman Beal's ire and many of the people who voted with him today.
So some alder people backed the mayor, though, after being at odds with her. Take a look at Alderman Daniel Espada and what he had to say after reading off the list of names of those who had been killed in traffic crashes in recent months.
What would we have done to have saved their lives? Can we be more equitable with where our infrastructure is, with where our cameras are? Sure. But I can't stand here in good conscience and cast a vote that I know leads to more names on that list, more people losing their lives.
Now, Espada is a member of the Democratic Socialist Caucus. Was he joined by other members of the caucus in keeping the fines the same?
He was joined by Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez, who said it was a very difficult decision by him. But two other members of the DSA caucus, Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa and Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez Sanchez, did not vote on this measure, saying it presented a false choice between revenue for the city and safety for its residents. And they urged that the city now turn its focus to improving the street infrastructure in Chicago to make it safer for everyone to get around town.
Okay, so in other action, City Council did pass the ethics reform package. Remind us what that overhaul would look like.
Well, it is now going to cost elected officials in Chicago $20,000 if they are found to have violated the city's ethic ordinance. It also expands the city's conflict of interest rules in an effort to prevent older people from using their elected office to benefit their friends and relatives, something we've seen pretty often here in Chicago.
$20,000 in fees. Okay, Heather, thanks as always. And of course, we'll see you later on in the program for Spotlight Politics as well. And you can read Heather's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. Up next, the fight over where music festivals should be held in the city. Stay with us.
We've made it.
Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope.
Black women are underrepresented. We still rise. We still show up for one another.
It's us investing in the next generation and giving them something to enrich the next generation with.
This summer, hundreds of thousands of music lovers will descend on the city for its annual music festivals. Lollapalooza may be the biggest, but tens of thousands of people head to parks around the city for festivals like Pitchfork and Riot Fest, among others. And that impact on public land is a point of contention for some neighbors who live near the parks. Joining us now are Leslie Recht of the Grant Park Advisory Council and Anton Adkins from Friends of Douglas Park. We should note we also invited a representative from the Chicago Park District. They did send us a statement, which we will have for you shortly. Anton, let's start with you, please, because you live across from Douglas Park, which has had 2 of 3 music festivals already this summer. What's that impact been like on residents?
Yeah, the impact is something that I like to think of it with the 5 senses, something that we can see, smell, taste, hear, and touch. We can hear the music as it's playing. We can see the crowds, whether it's directly in front of us on our porch, waiting for an Uber, passed out in our yards, or even just walking by, something that we can see as far as trash littered across our personal yards or even the park across the street. It's something that is very inconvenient for the way of life that we have here as private citizens for about 3 to 4 days.
And it sounds like it sounds like you're at the park, at the festival, whether you want to or not. But does it also limit your access to what is your neighborhood park?
Yes, recreational activities are put on hold until further notice, whether the soccer fields are just tarnished, basically, or just suspended until the gates or the stages are taken down. During the festivals, parking is limited, where even the public parts or even the private parts are taken away due to festival goers. And it really limits us. It hinders us from doing what we normally do from day to day.
And as you're speaking, we're looking at some photos of some of the damage that happens to the parks there. Leslie, what do you think can be done to lessen the impact of Lollapalooza in Grant Park?
Well, there are several things we've asked for. Alderman King had a hearing, a public Zoom hearing on Lolla about 2 weeks ago. And so there were quite a few people who live around the park who made requests. And we summarized those as the advisory council. One thing we asked them to do was limit the decibel level of the stages, which is not currently included in the contract that they have with Lolla. We asked them to clean up every day because there were a lot of people who were concerned. With 100,000 people a day for 4 days, people were throwing up, defecating, urinating, doing all kinds of things on the streets and alleys, and we asked that the city clean up after every day. We asked them to have better tents and protections for mostly young people coming who have health issues, who need help. They obviously need help. More porta potties, better access to the park for the public, because of course the park is closed for a very long time, both before, during, and after Lolla, and damage, tremendous damage to the park. We feel that Lolla is not paying for the damage they're doing to the park. And that's true across all of these fests. I think Anton can tell you that Douglas Park is no different than Grant Park, except the scope, the scale of what's going on.
Leslie, are there any benefits, for example, the impact on local businesses, and some festivals hire or contribute to, for example, sports gear for local teams in the case of Douglas Park? Do you see any benefits to these festivals?
Well, I think there's always been a benefit. The revenue that the city and the Park District get from events like Lala has been spread around. The concern we've always had is that there's absolutely no capital program to repair damage to Grant Park, not only from Lala, but a lot of the other events. So we're not denying that there's a benefit, a monetary benefit to some of these events. But what we're saying is it's not a fair balance for people who want to use the park, for the revenue that's coming in. If you think the revenue from 100,000 people a day is being fairly spread around, our concern is the answer is no. They're parking semis on the tennis courts and damaging them. They've got semis that drive on sidewalks and pulverizing those. There are just so many negative things that are happening because of the fests that aren't being taken care of.
So the Chicago Park District, as we mentioned earlier, we did invite someone from the district to join us. They did respond with a statement that reads in part, "The Chicago Park District requires organizers of large-scale music festivals to submit and execute a community engagement plan before the event permit is approved and issued. The plan ensures neighboring residents and businesses are aware of the event, have the opportunity to voice their support and concerns, and are kept informed of event operations that impact the surrounding community." Anton, do you think it might be a good thing at all to have people coming to your community who may not otherwise know where Douglas Park is or know where it is aside from the festival? Or do you think there are better ways to integrate the fests into the neighborhood?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the things that Leslie was saying, I concur with. Of course, there's a monetary aspect to this that helps the city, that helps the Chicago Park District. But I think in a more closer or more local aspect, I don't think there's much benefit. We see an influx, thousands of festival goers that attend these different festivals in our community. It's wonderful to have people come to North Lawndale, especially with such bad clippings of crime and such that are here, to have people come and actually see the beauty of the community that we live in. But it's different when there is no economic impact, where people are not spending money beyond coming to the park or just using CTA. There is nothing else that happens here for us community members besides the literal representation of the fest that we see. If there was something else that was a part of it, then maybe it would be a good thing.
And there's been the idea of having just one dedicated place for music festivals, whether it's Northerly Island or land near Soldier Field. Leslie, we've got about 10 seconds left. Is that something that would make sense to you?
It's possible, but again, there are all kinds of protections that have to be discussed. And the advisory council wasn't included, the public hasn't been included. So I believe that there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen before that kind of decision should be made.
Okay, it sounds like a lot of work would need to be done. My thanks to the two of you for joining us, Leslie Recht and Anton Atkins.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate your help in getting these issues out to the public.
Thanks for joining us. Up next, a musical commemorating more than 400 years of Black American history. But first, a look at the weather. There's much more ahead on the show, including the discovery of a new fossil. But first, the Vidum Theater in Westtown is commemorating more than 400 years of Black American history. Angelito recently brought us this story. Here's another look.
These struggles that we face are all of America's struggles. And we're in this together. I don't want this show to be a Black show. This is an American show.
a local production, is celebrating the 400th anniversary of 1619, albeit 3 years later.
1619 is not a traditional play, musical. It's more of like vignettes that take the audience members on a journey through the lives of our ancestors.
What I'm hoping to do is to give context to the struggles that we're facing in this country, to give background, to help people understand that we are part of a bigger story. And so it behooves us as Americans to find out where we come from and where we're going collectively.
It starts out with the African diaspora, with the enslaved people coming over. And it talks about the first 20 that arrived here in the Americas. And then it moves all the way through where we are now, you know, a little over 400 years later. And despite the pain, there's been a lot of progress. Despite the struggle, there's been a lot of success.
Their skin, beautifully colored by the melanin running through their veins.
So it really celebrates our movement from being enslaved people to being Americans. And it asks, you know, what does it mean to be an American?
Comprised of 8 original songs, spoken word, and even dance, choreographer and actor Marcello Lee says all mediums are necessary to tell a story only words might not be able to.
It's been the voice for, our voice for 400 years, because when you can speak, you can move. I try my best to combine the styles. What I feel like 400 years we connect with outside of African movement has been jazz, has been modern, has been hip-hop, the evolution of movement.
From racism to colorism to how the U.S. has adapted and everything in between. Playwright and producer Ted Williams says he thought art to be the only way to start these necessary conversations.
We have a nation full of gun violence, a nation full of inequality, a nation full of racism, a nation full of all kinds of destructive things that if we're going to survive as a nation, we have to do the work to do this.
And it's not something that can be healed overnight.
Their financial and psychological subjugation would last for generations.
But this play opens up the door to conversation because it challenges, it also reaffirms, it heals, it creates discussion and dialogue about what it means, and it's going to make some people uncomfortable, but that's okay. It also really, really gives a lot of joy and affirmation to the audience as well.
While the musical looks at past hardships, its primary focus is on a brighter future for everyone.
America is a wonderful, wonderful place in some certain ways. It just has not been extended to everyone. I'm not trying to tear down America. I'm trying to make America work for everyone. And that's what this is about.
Some people are not going to open up a book to read about it, but if they can see it on stage, it'll plant that seed. And art is a way in which you can take a very sensitive subject, put it on stage, and allow people to laugh, cry, allow them to feel what it is that you're trying to convey, and it'll make a difference.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And 1619, The Journey of a People, a musical, premiered at Vidham Theater last month, but will have an encore performance on July 30th. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a stunning new fossil discovery from paleontologist Neil Shubin and his team at the University of Chicago.
It is inexcusable, unacceptable, un-American.
And our Spotlight Politics team on guns, abortion, and the upcoming primetime January 6th hearing. But first, some more of today's top stories. Local pediatricians are urging parents to get their kids vaccinated for COVID-19 as the school year quickly approaches. Since the final age group became eligible to receive the shot last month, just 6.6% of children under age 5 in Chicago have been vaccinated. A local health professional says the possible side effects of children getting infected with COVID are much more concerning than the mild, if any, effects of the vaccine.
To those who presume their child will be relatively unaffected by getting COVID-19, know that although children who contract it tend to experience less severe symptoms, they could develop MIS-C and become extremely sick. Vaccinating your child will greatly reduce the chance for severe illness. When it comes to side effects from the vaccine, the most common seen in all ages are mild.
Doctors stress getting kids signed up as soon as possible before the school year because depending on when they receive the vaccine, they'll be fully immunized within 6 to 13 weeks. And the Chicago Sky is looking for a repeat, and the defending champs are off to a great start, becoming the first WNBA team to clinch a playoff berth this season. This after a 78-74 victory today over the Seattle Storm. It's the Sky's fastest route to 20 wins since 2013. The WNBA playoffs begin August 17th. And the Brookfield Zoo is welcoming a new addition to their Addax antelope family. The zoo announces a male calf of the critically endangered Addax was born on July 2nd. His birth is the result of an Addax species survival plan, which is a cooperative population management and conservation program that the zoo participates in. Fewer than 100 of the animals are estimated to exist in the wild. In 2004, in the Canadian Arctic, University of Chicago paleontologist Neil Shubin and his team made an amazing discovery. A fossilized amphibian he named Tiktaalik, believed to be among the first fish to have ventured out of sea and onto land some 375 million years ago. Now the team says another fossil found at the same time and for years largely ignored could shed more light on that pivotal time in the evolution of life. And joining us now is, of course, University of Chicago paleontologist Neil Shubin to tell us more. Welcome back, Neil. So this is a pretty impressive discovery. You actually found this fossil in 2004 in a place called Nunavut in the Canadian Arctic. What brought you to this particular area to go fossil hunting, and what was it like?
So we had identified this part of the Canadian Arctic, in fact, these rocks in the Canadian Arctic, they lie adjacent to the ice, as being perfect to find these kinds of creatures because the rocks were the right age and the right type to hold these fossils. They were formed in ancient streams and rivers. And the rocks were 375 million years old, which, but based on the research of other people, told us we were in the right time frame. So the right age, the right kind of rock. You know, it was just a matter of, cracking enough rock and looking at enough rock to find these fossils. It took us 6 years. So what we're talking about was found in the 4th year of a 6-year set of expeditions.
Okay. So this fossil, it ended up sitting in a drawer, though, for about 15 years. What prompted you and your team to take another look at it?
Yeah, so we found this fossil almost a week before we found the famous Tiktaalik rosea. And really what happened was Tiktaalik just pulled all the oxygen out of the room. It was such an exciting discovery. And it took many years to get all the scientific papers out on Tiktaalik. We published the first papers in 2006, but then papers came out in 2008, 2014, and the last of the papers came out only last year. So really, we were spending much of our time working with Tiktaalik, and this thing was, sitting in a drawer. What was really interesting, because as soon as we finished the work on Tiktaalik, the 2 postdocs in my laboratory who pretty much did all this work, Justin Lemberg and Tom Stewart, who had literally spent thousands of hours on this, we had a new CT scanner, an X-ray machine in the basement at the University of Chicago that had high enough energy where it could blast through the rocks. So what they did is they took one of the rocks that we collected, which really didn't have much on it other than a scale, and they put it in the CT scanner, and what did they find? They found an entire fin inside that block, which was truly amazing.
Holy cow. Of course, when you saw some scans, right, that leapt out at you, and how did you know, though, that this was not another Tiktaalik fossil?
Yeah, great question. So, the scans are really beautiful because what you can do is when you CT scan these things, you can digitally remove the rock and you can see the bones in 3 dimensions. You can see the whole animal, you can see the fin. Now, what was interesting about this one was the skull, the front of the skull, was almost identical to Tiktaalik, a little bit smaller. This creature's about half the size of Tiktaalik, maybe about 2.5 feet long. Tiktaalik's about 4 feet long. But other than size, the bones were identical, the way they fit together were identical, that sort of thing. It was when we saw the fin that all sorts of new stuff came about. The fin is very different. It had the same bony pattern as Tiktaalik that had, an upper arm bone, forearm bones, even bones that correspond to wrists. So it had a shoulder and an elbow and so forth, like Tiktaalik. But what was very different was the upper arm bone, the bone known as the humerus. It was totally different from that of Tiktaalik. So it just goes to show that this was clearly a different kind of critter.
Okay, and just so that our audience knows as well, Tiktaalik, there is evidence, obviously, that when it came out of the water and evolved, it was able to walk around on four.
Yeah, and we know that because when we look at bones like the humerus, the upper arm bone, there are these giant crests or ridges that lie on that bone. And they told us that Tiktaalik has a very large pectoral muscle, these pectoral muscles, right? And what do we use pectoral muscles for? For push-ups, right? For bench presses and things like that. So Tiktaalik had big pectoral muscles. We knew that because of these shelves and stuff on the upper arm bone. But this new creature known as Kikatania didn't have any of that stuff. It didn't have massive pectoral muscles. It couldn't support itself with its appendages. So not only was it different from Tiktaalik, but it also functioned differently from Tiktaalik. It couldn't walk about.
And so, how can you tell from looking at Kikatania that this creature was evolving to return to the sea as opposed to emerging from it, which is what we believe Tiktaalik did?
That's right, and this is the question that really surprised us, because when we look at where Kikatania sits on the evolutionary tree, and we make these evolutionary trees based on the features that these animals have, what we found is that the ancestors of the ancestors of Kikatania already had those crests and ridges that I was telling you about in Tiktaalik, that had big pectoral muscles that could walk around. So the ancestors, when we look at where Kikatania is on the evolutionary tree, the ancestors of Kikatania actually were able to support themselves with their fins and maybe even able to walk. So what you see is Kikatania is a creature that returned to the water, from ancestors that were already making a commitment to beginning to walk on their fins.
So for us, non-paleontologists, it's easy to think of evolution as sort of a linear process. But this fossil shows that may not be the case. What do you think prompted Kikatania to return to the water? What was going on at the time?
Yeah, so what Kikatania shows is that this transition from life in water to life on land went both ways in the early days, right? Some creatures were going to walk, some creatures were returning. They didn't want to be on land. The opportunities in water were pretty great for a creature like Kikatania, largely because there's still a lot of food in the water. We know from the structure of the teeth of Kikatania that it had fangs and pointy teeth, so it was clearly a carnivore. But one thing that Kikatania had is when it returned to the water, it had a skull like Tiktaalik. And Tiktaalik had a very specialized skull where it could both bite as well as do suction feeding, pull things into its mouth by opening its mouth really quickly. So Kikatania returned to the water with a whole new kind of feeding apparatus, and we think that gave it its oomph to succeed in the water.
And of course, you'll probably recall there was the meme from during the pandemic of Tiktaalik. Tell us about that briefly.
Well, there's a lot of hating on Tiktaalik during the pandemic. There was like, throw the fish back, because they're blaming it for all the problems of humankind that we've been witnessing in the last 3 years. So it was really funny to watch on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram all the memes about don't let the fish leave the water. And here was what we have. We have one of the fish that returned to the water, Kikatania. So hopefully that'll stop the haters.
You know what? You're right. I'm going back in the water. We've got about 30 seconds, Neil. What's next for you and your team?
Well, what's next is what's exciting about Kikatania is that it's showing us that there's an enormous unknown diversity of these kinds of creatures right at the cusp of the transition from life in water to life on land. It's not just one or two species, it's likely many. So what this means for people like myself is that there's still more to discover. So we're very excited, possibly, to get out to the rocks again, to get out to the Canadian Arctic, to look in collections around the world that people already made and maybe CT scan some of these fossils to see what really diversity exists, because I think there's a whole new world to discover.
Always cool science with Neil Shubin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, our Spotlight Politics team previews tomorrow's primetime January 6th congressional hearing. Stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Political battles over guns, abortion, contraception, speed cameras, and much more. The focus of this week's Spotlight Politics. Joining us now are Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. Welcome back, gang. Let's start with national politics. Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger set to lead tomorrow's primetime January 6th hearing. Here's what he said about it.
The reality is, I'll give you this preview, the president didn't do very much, but gleefully watch television during this time frame. We're going to present a lot more than that.
Heather, tell us what viewers should expect tomorrow night.
So tomorrow's hearing, which is in prime time and is thought to be the final of the series of hearings, will focus on 187 minutes. That's the time between 1:10 p.m. on January 6th, when former President Trump told the crowd that had gathered out on Capitol Hill to march to the Capitol and that he would join them, until 4:17 p.m. when he posted a video on Twitter telling the crowd that had ransacked the Capitol and stopped the certification of the 2020 election to go home. The committee, you heard the representative say, is going to say that President Trump didn't do very much to stop that. And the committee has evidence that details exactly what that means.
Amanda, talk about what happened to the Secret Service texts that can corroborate the testimony that Trump tried to steer his vehicle towards the Capitol that day.
Yeah, steer his vehicle from the Secret Service members who were there to protect him. We don't know what these texts could show because, in fact, the Secret Service doesn't have them. Just one text provided to the committee, despite reporting that the committee, it's not as if this is a recent request and the Secret Service can say, oops, we didn't realize that you might want this sort of thing. Rather, that a request was made, I believe, just 10 days after the insurrection at the Capitol. So back in January of 2021, made known that the material evidence from cell phones of Secret Service members would be wanted and requested. So we're not quite sure what that will show. The Secret Service saying that there is nothing intentionally awry here, that in fact it was a planned migration of cell phone services, and through that disruption, not all texts were backed up, but certainly has raised suspicions and frustrations, with at least one member of the committee saying, quote, "I smell a rat."
Okay. Paris, do you expect we'll see any criminal charges for former President Trump as an outcome of these hearings?
Well, it's clear that members of the January 6th committee, including Congressman Kinzinger from Illinois, Congresswoman Cheney, do believe they have laid out a compelling case of a conspiracy here to defraud the United States, a lot of parts, a lot of actors, but the ringleader being Donald Trump, the former president. The question is, will the DOJ see the same thing? And we know from experience here in Illinois and Chicago, the Department of Justice doesn't bring criminal cases unless they have a 99.9% of winning those cases. So do they believe there is a smoking gun? And when you're dealing with a former president of the United States, it has to be the smokingest gun that you could find, because if they're going to bring charges against a former president, they had better win that case. So the reporting indicates right now that prosecutors aren't sold yet on tangible crimes that they could charge the former president with. But he does face peril at the state level. You see the case in Georgia moving along with the grand jury, with plans to interview Rudy Giuliani, and even folks in Trump's inner circle believing there is a chance that Trump could be indicted at some point in one of these cases on some kind of state criminal charges.
Okay, more to come on that, obviously. And Paris, welcome back. And we will have more coverage on the hearing that happens tomorrow night at 9 o'clock for Chicago Tonight special time. Meanwhile, we also heard on Capitol Hill Highland Park Mayor Nancy Rotering testifying before a Senate committee on banning assault weapons. Take a look at what Senator Dick Durbin said about the hearing.
America must do better. It is inexcusable, unacceptable, un-American for us to sell combat weapons to a man like the shooter in Highland Park. There is no excuse. There is no Second Amendment excuse to allow that sort of thing to happen.
And Amanda, you covered this hearing for us today. This is the 10th hearing about this. Is a political shift beginning to happen?
I think there was a shift after Uvalde, which is where you saw some Republicans signing on to this bipartisan gun package that did institute gun control for the first time in 3 decades, including additional background checks for and checks into mental health records of those under the age of 21 looking to purchase a firearm. Has there been a shift since Uvalde and since, post-Uvalde and since Highland Park? I'm not sure that there has been. We heard from even those who were signatories to the bipartisan package that they are not interested or believers in an assault weapons ban. Again, Highland Park certainly on board with this, and a lot of very frustrated, angry residents, parents who are politically going to be very active, I think, in DC as well as on the state level. But I'm not sure that we're going to see a change out of Washington, at least from Congress.
Now, Paris, we know there was an assault weapons ban in this country. It lapsed in the mid-early 2000s. Are activists asking for the same or more restrictions in the wake of the Highland Park shooting?
It appears that they're asking for the same restrictions that we saw in the 90s, a ban on assault weapons, a ban on high-capacity magazines. As Amanda said, it doesn't look like there is momentum at the federal level. There's some reporting that in the House Democrats might put up a bill to this effect. There does appear to be more momentum at the state level for state lawmakers to get together for a special session to ban assault weapons statewide. The problem there is it wouldn't ban weapons that are already in the hands, assault rifles that are already in the hands of civilians. And we know that when this kind of legislation comes up, there's a run on gun stores to buy all these guns. So how effective would a state ban on assault weapons be when so many folks already own them and there's no national ban? And we know that so many guns that wind up in crime scenes, especially in Chicago, come from the surrounding states like Wisconsin and Indiana that have very lax gun laws.
So there was a political protest, though, in front of the Supreme Court. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky being arrested in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe in the Dobbs decision. Heather, Schakowsky in the House just passed bills protecting access to birth control and abortion, but those bills are likely headed for defeat in the Senate. What are these votes about? Just to get on the record in advance of the midterms?
Yes, and there's no doubt that the arrests yesterday in front of the Supreme Court were political theater of the highest quality, all of the cameras, all of the congresspeople being hauled away by members of the police department. Those images are designed for people in states like Illinois, where people are frustrated and angry with the Supreme Court decision. And of course, I'm sure Congresswoman Schakowsky hopes that that anger and frustration will translate into higher turnout in this November's general election, in the midterms. Whether that will happen, it remains to be seen. But you're right. The fact is that a bill to codify Roe versus Wade or ensure a federal right to abortion care nationally appears dead on arrival in the United States Senate.
Okay, so some of these same culture issues, guns, abortion, also being hotly debated by Governor J.B. Pritzker and his Republican opponent for governor, Darren Bailey. Paris, these two men are polar opposites on some of these issues. Marriage equality, gun rights, obviously abortion. Is this going to be a bellwether election, a race to watch as a preview for what might come in the 2024 national?
Well, it certainly would seem to be a preview of what the 2024 national campaign might look like, but the results might be different on a national level when you take into effect the Electoral College versus the state of Illinois. It would appear that Governor Pritzker has a significant advantage for his arguments here in these so-called culture war issues over Darren Bailey, and it doesn't appear like Darren Bailey is going to moderate those issues. He's going to ride the horse that brought him here on abortion, being against nearly any kind of restriction for guns or gun ownership. Those would not appear to play very well in the state of Illinois. But you've seen this national strategy here by Democrats to help, kind of secretly help these MAGA far-right Republicans in states like Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Maryland win their primaries, thinking that it will be a cakewalk in the general election. I mean, Bailey is who Pritzker wanted to face. The question is, could that backfire? We don't know what the issues are going to be 4 or 5 months from now and where the middle-of-the-road independent voters are going to be on those issues, and maybe they won't be so turned off by a super far-right MAGA candidate if, let's say, gas prices are really high or inflation tends to be really bad. So that's going to be something to watch. Did the Democrats overplay their hand here, helping boost these kind of unpalatable or seemingly unpalatable far-right candidates?
Heather, meanwhile, Darren Bailey's campaign coffers are running low. And how much does that matter in this race? Do we think the GOP billionaires will step up and back him the way they did in the primary?
Well, that is a really big question that will have a big impact on the race until November. I think that the issue is whether Darren Bailey can continue to use social media, Facebook. He's, very good at doing those Facebook Live videos to sort of highlight his issues and reach his base, whether he can take that sort of strategy and use it to win statewide rather than just in the Republican primaries we saw. There's no doubt that Governor Pritzker, of course, who's a billionaire and who has said he is prepared to spend whatever it takes to win re-election, he's going to have a monetary advantage. The question is, can Bailey use other strengths that he has to combat that? And that, it's a cliche, but it's the $64,000 question.
Chris, I want to jump in real quickly because you mentioned 2024. We can't not mention J.B. Pritzker going to Florida, giving that speech in front of Florida Democrats and then getting COVID, going to other parts of the country, giving speeches, trying to raise his national profile. It certainly appears like he's very serious about potentially waging a campaign in 2024 should Biden not run. I mean, he's got one hurdle to get over here, the election, re-election in Illinois, but that really merits a lot of watching. He seems to have really ramped up his efforts to become a national leader among Democrats.
So also in city news, alder people unanimously approving a long-fought-over ethics debate. Heather, you've been following this one for a while. Does this have teeth? Is this going to actually curtail some of the revolving door, the corruption that we've seen at City Hall?
Well, if you listen to Steve Berlin, who's the executive director of the Chicago Board of Ethics, he says that this will put Chicago at the vanguard of ethics reform for cities. And that, is no small feat, because you're right, there was a lot of behind the scenes backroom negotiations over this bill. And it really culminated this week with a very public confrontation between the mayor and that Board of Ethics. She's saying that they needed to change the way that they go after elected officials who are believed to have violated the ethics rules. And the measure that passed today changed how that will happen. And it will give those elected officials a chance to respond to any concerns or complaints before we in the news media or the public can even get a whiff that something is being investigated. So that will be a big change. Whether it helps reduce corruption, left my crystal ball in the other room.
Your magic 8-ball, what about that? Is that working? So Mayor Lightfoot didn't win any aldermanic friends this week, though, when she alone gave the green light to NASCAR racing downtown. Amanda, should she have consulted with the alder people whose wards would have been affected?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this was you don't ask the question if you think you're going to get the answer you don't want, if that was perhaps what was going on here. But certainly this is a big thing for Chicago that will presumably delight some fans, but also be a monster inconvenience for businesses, potentially for residents of those areas. So yes, you consult the local alder people whose wards this will affect. We have, for example, Alderman Hopkins, who, by the way, had been sort of thinking about running for mayor himself, saying, hey, what's going on here? Very unhappy about it. And of course, you got, let's hit the brakes as well. While this event is certainly different, it is sanctioned. You've got to figure NASCAR is going to put a whole lot of money in, maybe fill some potholes. Perhaps people will really not mind NASCAR coming if that is completed. But this comes as there are these other changes, right, in terms of debates about speed cameras and about drag racing. And so certainly there's quite the juxtaposition between these two events, both welcoming speeders, professional ones anyway.
Well, and there's certainly the optics, right? At the exact same time, today exactly, the city is approving stiffer penalties for drag racing and drifting. Heather, is this just bad optics? What is this?
It's quite a coincidence, isn't it, Brandis? To crack down on these illegal sideshows, which are truly becoming sort of video viral events, and at the same time inviting NASCAR to not only come to Chicago, but to run a race on city streets and to shut down much of the downtown during the race, and of course before and after, is a huge change. And it was one that was made at least without the fulsome consultation of the city council. And there's no doubt that there are lingering bad feelings about that. Alderman Brendan Riley took to Twitter this afternoon to say that the mayor was playing semantics by saying, well, she told them about it. He said, yeah, she let us know it was a done deal.
Okay. Well, obviously, it's always a fun day at City Hall. Heather Sharon, thanks for covering that for us. And Amanda Vinicky, Pierre Schutz, thanks, everybody. See you next week. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at a special time, 9 o'clock. That is after, of course, those congressional hearings. We'll have analysis. The January 6th hearings return to prime time, this time focusing on then-President Donald Trump's inaction as a mob stormed the Capitol. And we sit down with Taylor Bennett ahead of his upcoming free concert at Lincoln Hall. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.